Good evening. I want to talk about a topic that is particularly important to me, and that is owning Israel's story, rejuvenation or disappearance. It's important because for 35 years I've taught at Emory University, and in so doing, I've come to understand what students do know and what they don't know. In 1959, my parents took me at age 13 to Lauterbach, Germany. Both my parents were German Jewish, rural Orthodox Jews who took me on an excursion to investigate and look at their past. We went to a small village near Lauterbach. The synagogue was still standing. It had not been destroyed on Kristallnacht. The synagogue was too close to the other houses in the city. There was an external walk that went up to the top of the balcony. I went inside. I broke into a makeshift cupboard that had been put there by someone in the US Army during World War II. I took down some parchments of Haggadot and Torahs and Megillot. I brought them in my hand. I took them downstairs. I walked down, and the villagers had now been standing around looking at me and said, "Das gehört dir nicht." It doesn't belong to you. Now, it had been my great-grandfather's family that had provided the land for the synagogue. And I said to my mom, I said, "Mom, if it doesn't belong to me, to whom does it belong?" She says, "Kenneth, it belongs to you because it's part of a long tradition." And what my mother then told me in the car stuck with me for the rest of my life. She said, "Your respective grandparents were smart enough to send out of Germany your mother and your father when they were both age 20. They had the perception, the understanding, the foresight, the pragmatism to realize what life would be for a young Jewish male and a young Jewish female in Germany." I didn't know then how smart my grandfathers were. I didn't know they exercised the choice. I didn't know how deeply committed they were to their Judaism. I knew little about my family history. When I went off to the University of Michigan to get a graduate degree, I learned history. I learned Jewish history. I didn't learn narratives. I'll get back to the narratives in a moment. I learned history. I learned Jewish history, and I learned Lech Lecha to the contemporary. I learned that Jews made a choice, that Avram made a choice. He made the choice to go to a place that he didn't even know where he was going. Strange. He made a choice, as did his people who followed after him, generations, to believe in one God, to take with them this notion of we can follow, we can believe, we can know, we can observe, we can adhere, we can maintain our commitments to these ideals, to these commandments, to these mitzvot. I learned at the university and afterwards that Jews, when they left the land of Israel, when they were expelled, when they went like packs all over the Mediterranean, they took with them this Torah. They took with them this Bible. They took with them these commandments. What was it about people in Baghdad and Berlin and Bangkok and Boston that every week they observed the same Parshat HaShavua? What was it? What I learned from this experience is that in their diaspora living, Jews adhered to something critical, core values. They were a community, but at the same time, while they were community, they were being degraded, attacked because of their belief. Today, if we say identity to the state of Israel is because we need a safe place and a secure place, what we're forgetting is we're forgetting the core values of who we are as Jews. It's not just that we were victims. It's not just that people took advantage of us. It's but because we have a core where we have central cores of who we are. And in steering Israel's history, if all we do is teach it from the point of view of what others say of us, then we're shortchanging this and future generations. There's no doubt about it. You get to the 19th century, 18th, 19th century, and what do you find? You find Jews who decide to take destiny into their own hands, but they decide maybe they'll choose to change their Judaism. Reform, conservative, modern Orthodox. They'll even choose Marxism. They'll choose to leave Eastern and Western Europe. They'll choose maybe territory, maybe Zionism. They'll make a choice. Self-determination is a gift. Staying in your community was a gift. Staying true to your beliefs was a gift. Choosing to do so is something that we have always done, and we've always done well. When Herzl goes to the Sultan and he says to the Sultan, I want to buy land, I want a state, I want a charter, I want a homeland. He actually used the word homeland. The Sultan said no. But Herzl decided, along with others at that moment, that it was important for Jews to take destiny into their own hands and not just go to Charleston or New York or Boston, not just go to South Africa, not just to go to Argentina or Australia, but actually create a state. Zionism is the Jewish national liberation movement of self-determination where Jews decide to take destiny into their own hands. And slowly but surely, they connect land and people to create a nucleus for a state. It doesn't happen quickly. It happens through lobbying. It happens through speaking to the British. It happens to speaking ultimately to the UN. Individuals chose to make a decision. Herzl bequeaths to a whole series of individuals this notion of we can do this if we want to. This is the Zionist Congress in May of 1939. Ben-Gurion, Weizmann, Kaplan, sitting there knowing what was going on in Europe and also knowing the British were closing Palestine to Jewish immigration and truncating Jewish land purchase. And yet they persevered. They understood that they were fighting for choice, fighting for self-determination, fighting to create a place of their own. And they ultimately did. And 30 years later, 40 years later, assembling in the Israeli parliament, you have a group of 6 men, 7, sitting around discussing, should we or should we not accept peace with the Arab next door? Should we accept the Camp David Accords? Name them. Top row, Shimon Peres, Yigal Allon, Abba Eban. Front row, glasses, Simcha Ehrlich, Menachem Begin, Ezra Weizmann, Yigal Yadin. What's the connection between Herzl and these gentlemen? The connection is they decided that self-determination was important. They decided to fight for choice. But what happens when individuals want to take choice away from us? What should we be doing? We should not say, oh, it's okay. We should speak up and we should speak out. We should not allow others to take the choice away. What does it say in UN Resolution 242? That resolution passed at the United Nations in November of 1967. It says explicitly, in an ambiguous way, the following: withdrawal of Israel armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict. It doesn't say total withdrawal. It doesn't say full withdrawal. But then what happens? A president of the United States comes along and says, I want to rewrite history. I want to create a narrative. I don't like what it says. So the former president of the United States, a man for whom I worked for 24 years after he left the White House, he's invented resolution says that Israel must withdraw from the occupied territories, mandates Israel withdrawal, requires Israeli withdrawal to the 67 borders as specified in 242, and promised at Camp David. Do you imagine Menachem Begin promised to withdraw from Judea and Samaria at Camp David? I resigned from the Carter Center, not because of the title of the book. Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid is a terrible title as far as I'm concerned. I resigned from the Carter Center because the man invented the truth. He invented something new. He wrote a narrative. I am faithful to my discipline as a historian. As a historian, I can't choose what is truth. I have to see it in the document. I have to see it as it's presented. This book is intended to reshape history. And what are the implications of it? If it mandates and if it requires it, it takes the choice away from Israel to choose what it says is important and when it is important. It says you must withdraw, and then we'll talk. It takes self-determination out of the hands, the very reason for why the Jewish state was created. Either you speak up and speak out, or you stay quiet. I remember very well that day in Germany when I was told, das gehört dir nicht. Those papers, those parchments, those remnants were part of a tradition. They were part of who I was and where I came from. It was part of parents and grandparents who decided to infuse in me a notion of Judaism, a notion of caring for others, a notion of community. They also taught me that apathy and ignorance have no place. You have to do, you have to learn, you have to spread it, you have to tell others. And if we don't, we are just as guilty as anyone else for writing a narrative. For narratives don't tell the whole story. They're meant intentionally to shape someone's view, not to tell someone the way it really happened. When I came to Emory University, I did not know in 1977 that within 4 years I would meet a former president. I didn't know I would write a book with him. I didn't know I would travel throughout the Middle East with him. I also know I wouldn't call him out in public. But I was prepared because I had an education. I was prepared because my parents imparted to me the notions and the love of history. Not necessarily Jewish history in the sense of being religious, but being moral and ethical, of knowing the way to go, of knowing how to go, of knowing what the buoys were. I learned from my parents. I learned from history study. I learned that Jews, before they had a state, also had a foreign ministry. I knew that there were Jewish leaders who went and spoke on behalf of the Jewish community. I knew that Jews had acted as a community and had a bureaucracy before they actually had a state. I knew they practiced sovereignty, but it was called autonomy before they had a state. Their practice was in diaspora. The reality is that Jews are a minority. We were a minority, we are a minority, we will remain a minority. And if we don't fight for self-determination as a minority, we won't be there tomorrow. We have a choice. The choice is a simple one. Either we own our own story, we tell it to the next generation, we do what it says in the mezuzah, We teach it diligently to our children, or we abrogate our future to others, to people to invent history. History does not give do-overs. It's not like playing stoop ball in Brooklyn when the milk truck comes by and the ball hits the stoop and then hits the truck and you yell do-over. You don't get a do-over in history. If I had a do-over in history, I'd do over from 39 to 45. I don't get a do-over. Don't allow someone to hijack your history. Don't allow someone to tell your narrative. You're obliged to do it. Your children are obliged to do it. And you're obliged to teach them to do it. Thank you very much.